Black Hound of Death. Chapter 1. The Killer in the Dark. Egyptian darkness. The phrase is too vivid for complete comfort, suggesting not only blackness, but unseen things lurking in that blackness, things that skulk in the deep shadows and shun the light of day, slinking figures that prowl beyond the edge of normal life. Some such thoughts flitted vaguely through my mind that night as I groped along the narrow trail that wound through the deep pinelands. Such thoughts are likely to keep company with any man who dares invade in the night that lonely stretch of densely timbered river country, which the black people call Egypt, for some obscurely racial reason. There is no blackness this side of hell's unlighted abyss as absolute as the blackness of the pine woods. The trail was but a half-guessed trace winding between walls of solid ebony. I followed it as much by the instincts of the piney woods dweller as by the guidance of the external senses. I went as hurriedly as I dared, but stealth was mingled with my haste, and my ears were whetted to knife-edge alertness. This caution did not spring from the uncanny speculation roused by the darkness and silence. I had good material reason to be wary. Ghosts might roam the pinelands with gaping, bloody throats and cannibalistic hunger as the Negroes maintained, but it was no ghost I feared. I listened for the snap of a twig under a great splay foot, for any sound that would presage murder striking from the black shadows. The creature, which I feared haunted Egypt, was more to be dreaded than any gibbering phantom. That morning, the worst Negro desperado in that part of the state had broken from the clutches of the law, leaving a ghastly toll of dead behind him. Down along the river, bloodhounds were baying through the brush, and hard-eyed men with rifles were beating up the thickets. They were seeking him in the fastnesses near the scattered black settlements, knowing that a Negro seeks his own kind in his extremity. But I knew Tope Braxton better than they did. I knew he deviated from the general type of his race. He was unbelievably primitive, atavistic enough to plunge into uninhabited wilderness and live like a blood-mad gorilla in solitude that would have terrified and daunted a more normal member of his race. So while the hunt flowed away in another direction, I rode toward Egypt alone. But it was not altogether to look for Tope Braxton that I plunged into that isolated fastness. My mission was one of warning rather than search. Deep in the mazy pine labyrinth, a white man and his servant lived alone, and it was the duty of any man to warn them that a red-handed killer might be skulking about their cabin. I was foolish, perhaps, to be traveling on foot, but men who wear the name of Garfield are not in the habit of turning back on a task once attempted. When my horse unexpectedly went lame, I left him at one of the Negro cabins which fringed the edge of Egypt and went on afoot. Night overtook me on the path, and I intended remaining until morning with the man I was going to warn, Richard Brent. He was a taciturn recluse, suspicious and peculiar, but he could scarcely refuse to put me up for the night. He was a mysterious figure. Why he chose to hide himself in a southern pine forest, none knew. He had been living in an old cabin in the heart of Egypt for about 6 months. Suddenly, as I forged through the darkness, my speculations regarding the mysterious recluse were cut short, wiped clear out of my mind. I stopped dead, the nerves tingling in the skin on the backs of my hands. A sudden shriek in the dark has that effect, and the scream was edged with agony and terror. It came from somewhere ahead of me. Breathless silence followed that cry, a silence in which the forest seemed to hold its breath, and the darkness shut in more blackly still. Again the scream was repeated, this time closer. Then I heard the pound of bare feet along the trail, and a form hurled itself at me out of the darkness. My revolver was in my hand, and I instinctively thrust it out to fend the creature off. The only thing that kept me from pulling the trigger was the noise the object was making, gasping, sobbing noises of fear and pain. It was a man, and direly stricken. He blundered full into me, shrieked again, and fell sprawling, slobbering and yammering. "Oh, my God, save me! Oh, God, have mercy on me!" "What the devil is it?" I demanded, my hair stirring on my scalp at the poignant agony in the gibbering voice. The wretch recognized my voice. He clawed at my knees. "Oh, Mas Kirby, don't let him touch me. He's done killed my body and now he wants my soul. It's me, poor Jim Tyke. Don't let him get me." I struck a match and stood staring in amazement while the match burned down to my fingers. A black man groveled in the dust before me, his eyes rolling up whitely. I knew him well, one of the Negroes who lived in their tiny log cabins along the fringe of Egypt. He was spotted and splashed with blood, and I believe he was mortally wounded. Only abnormal energy rising from frenzied panic could have enabled him to run as far as he had. Blood jetted from torn veins and arteries in breast, shoulder, and neck, and the wounds were ghastly to see, great ragged tears that were never made by bullet or knife. One ear had been torn from his head and hung loose, with a great piece of flesh from the angle of his jaw and neck, as if some gigantic beast had ripped it out with his fangs. "What in God's name did this?" I ejaculated as the match went out, and he became merely an indistinct blob in the darkness below me. "A bear?" Even as I spoke, I knew that no bear had been seen in Egypt for 30 years. "He done it," the thick sobbing mumble welled up through the dark. "The white man that come by my cabin and asked me to guide him to Mr. Brent's house. He said he had a toothache, so he had his head bandaged, but the bandages slipped and I seen his face. He killed me for seeing him." "You mean he set dogs on you?" I demanded, for his wounds were such as I've seen on animals worried by vicious hounds. "No, sir," whimpered the ebbing voice. "He done it himself." Oh. The mumble broke in a shriek as he twisted his head, barely visible in the gloom, and stared back the way he had come. Death must have struck him in the midst of that scream, for it broke short at the highest note. He flopped convulsively once, like a dog hit by a truck, and then lay still. I strained my eyes into the darkness, and made out a vague shape a few yards away in the trail. It was erect and tall as a man. It made no sound. I opened my mouth to challenge the unknown visitant, but no sound came. An indescribable chill flowed over me, freezing my tongue to my palate. It was fear, primitive and unreasoning, and even while I stood paralyzed, I could not understand it, could not guess why that silent, motionless figure, sinister as it was, should rouse such instinctive dread. Then suddenly the figure moved quickly toward me, and I found my voice. "Who comes there?" No answer, but the form came on in a rush, and as I groped for a match, it was almost upon me. I struck the match. With a ferocious snarl, the figure hurled itself against me. The match was struck from my hand and extinguished, and I felt a sharp pain on the side of my neck. My gun exploded almost involuntarily and without aim, and its flash dazzled me, obscuring rather than revealing the tall man-like figure that struck at me. Then, with a crashing rush through the trees, my assailant was gone, and I staggered alone on the forest trail. Swearing angrily, I felt for another match. Blood was trickling down my shoulder, soaking through my shirt. When I struck the match and investigated, another chill swept down my spine. My shirt was torn and the flesh beneath slightly cut. The wound was little more than a scratch, but the thing that roused nameless fear in my mind was the fact that the wound was similar to those on poor Jim Tyke. End of section 1.